Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? We are back. It is a later than normal show. We've done it on Tuesday because we've got a special guest and some interesting things to bring you. And I've talked about him already. Bob is here. Before I introduce Bob properly, just want to say thank you to everybody for kind comments to the show yesterday. It was kind of just one put together last minute. I wanted to get one out and keep that consistency up, especially as we're talking consistency today. So appreciate the kind words. I know people found it useful, so I'm glad they did. Before we bring Bob in, just want to obviously talk about manscaped.com. They are the best in below the waist men's grooming. They do some excellent products. Talked about them many a times on this show. You can take advantage of all their wonderful products at manscaped.com with the code 5YARD. So that's the code 5YARD for 20% off plus free global shipping at manscaped.com. And then also as well, don't forget to tune in to Thursday's DFS show. We should have another great contest for you to join in, completely free to play, completely free deposit. You can just take advantage of that and play. Really pleased that Josh won that last week. Really nice person who I met as a result of being on the Fantasy Pros podcast. He started listening and he's won himself some money. So it could be you next week. So take advantage of that. But let's bring in today's guest. He was on a few weeks ago. He is now over at Dr. Roto, and he is the award-winning author of the award-winning Consistency Guide, which is out every year. One of my favorite guides, one of my toolbox go-tos, as you've heard me say thousands of times before. Bob, welcome back. How are you doing? You've got your Cleveland hoodie on. Life is good right now, I assume.
Yeah, I got to represent when I can. It's been a long drought, that's for sure. So we're hoping that the team kind of gets it together and keeps doing the right thing. I like the coach. I like the team. Obviously, two great running backs, but as you can see, injuries can hit very quickly, and then we pull out our third string running back, and he busts off for 146 yards. So I guess anybody who ever says the offensive lines don't mean anything in the NFL, it's wrong. Cleveland's got one of the best, and it proved right there that even their third string, it was a decent running back. I'm not saying it wasn't bad, but it certainly makes a big difference when you've got those hogs up there blowing some holes out for them and making some room, and that certainly happened. And it was an ugly win on Thursday night, but a win is a win. We'll take it. So,
of course, you got to take it. I mean, I remember Deontay Johnson playing in the AAF. He played for the Orlando Apollos under Steve Spurrier a couple of years ago, and I was like, I remember watching him thinking, this guy's pretty good. And actually, the Browns have got a couple of guys because you got Garrett Gilbert, who was also in the AAF under the Orlando Apollos. So those guys are teammates. Wouldn't shock me if Gilbert probably had a word and said, yeah, you should sign this guy. He's pretty good. I've no doubt that was some sort of conversation that happened. So amazing to see someone from quote unquote a part-time league or whatever you want to call it. I've always been of the belief the NFL needs a league like that. You think of the greats that have come through them, Kurt Warner, Brad Johnson. There's so many people that benefited from that old school NFL Europe. And to see Johnson just get a chance because he was in the AF. I'm sure XFL guys, Cardell Jones, I know is in the league, and there's a few guys that are going to be in the league. So, yeah, it's good to see. But we're not here to talk about part-time leagues and spring leagues. Otherwise, we could talk about XFL and all this, but we're not going to do that. We're talking about consistency. So, we're not going to focus on what happened this weekend. I've done that show. That has gone. We're going to focus on the first half of the fantasy season, because this is the point now that I think if you've got anywhere from 2 wins upwards, you have a good chance. Well, not a good chance. You have a chance still of making your playoffs. So you're 1 win or 0 wins. You need to do something beyond drastic to get there. So 2 wins, I still think you're in with a sniff. 3 wins, don't be despondent. 4, 5, 6, 7 wins, you're definitely in the playoff race. So let's go through, because you've compiled all the data for the entire season, and we're going to focus on. I think before we do this, you explain to people what a clutch game is for those that might not be. I think most of our listeners are, but to those that we've picked up that are quite new in the season, who might not have picked up the consistency guide, what's a clutch game? Because that's going to be the center of what we talk about right now.
Right. So the idea of determining the consistency of a player is them going over a certain threshold, depending on the scoring method. And when they get over that threshold, that's what we call a clutch game. We used to call it a consistency game, but it's way too hard to say, way too long. So I changed it to clutch because it's kind of the same thing, right? If you can count on them, they're clutch. So a clutch game, basically. So just kind of put in perspective, and so we'll go with the regular scoring: 4 points passing, touchdown, 1 for every 10 rushing, receiving, 6 yards or 6 points receiving, rushing, touchdown, and 4 points passing. Just your typical, and then PPR, of course. So in that scenario, you got to get over about 21 fantasy points for a quarterback to earn a clutch game, about 11 fantasy points for both the running backs and the wide receivers, and then tight ends is usually in the upper 8s, but let's just say 9 to be safe. It's actually a little bit up this year. It's a little bit closer in the 9 range. So let's just say 9. So again, what we're seeing is if the guy scores, tight end scores over 9 points, 3 out of 6 weeks, it's 50% consistent. So that's kind of what this is all about from a calculation standpoint. I hope that helps. And let's talk about some players.
Exactly. And while 9 points doesn't sound a lot, that is good enough to be a tight end one most weeks in the NFL for fantasy football, which is why I am not of a draft a tight end early unless his name is Travis Kelce. And I think even then you're probably overpaid this year, but we'll get to it. Let's start with quarterbacks, because actually I was genuinely surprised when you sent over this data to me that one of them I'm not surprised about, but one of them I am genuinely surprised about was 100% consistent, because whilst he's a good player and I think he's having a good season, I didn't think he'd had that many good games, and I think it kind of shows you and highlights it. So, I mean, in the 100% club, the 2 quarterbacks this season who have had 100% games, the one that didn't shock me was Jalen Hurts because of that rushing floor. We know that Mr. Fourth Quarter himself will not turn up for 75% of the games or 75% of the game and then turn up in the fourth quarter and make stuff happen. I don't think that's going to shock anyone that he's there. Right. Matthew Stafford is the other. Now, he's quarterback 6 on the season. I was a little shocked that this is why I like this metric, because I think Matt Stafford's been good. I don't think he's been exceptional. And yet he's quarterback 6 on the year, but he consistently is not let you down at any point this season. If you got him and you drafted him very, very late, you're very happy right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is Matthew Stafford, if you go back to his Detroit years, he would have about 1 year like this about every 3 years. Like he'd get like a 75, 80% year, and then injuries and the team around him would kind of break down, and he'd get more into the 60 to 70 percentage. It's always been a good, he's always one of those guys, if I can draft him as a backup, I usually would have gotten him. This year, I wish I would have drafted him as a backup. I went more with Derek Carr, which actually isn't all that bad either. He's been pretty good too, 71% consistent in top 10 as well. But I usually would just wait when Derek Carr is available as a backup. I just drafted him. But yeah, if I would have drafted Stafford, he might be starting in some of my leagues, that's for sure, because some of the other guys certainly have been pulling, their weight, like the Justin Herberts and some of those folks, but again, yeah, it's Stafford is definitely. I mean, I think the other thing you got to look is that team doesn't have much of a running game, which is kind of like why he did pretty well in Detroit from a consistency standpoint, because he was carrying them. Now the difference is that the LA Rams, who I thought would have a much stronger defense and they wouldn't have to throw the ball as much, is not holding up that end of the bargain, but that's a positive thing for Stafford. I'm waiting for a team to start doubling up Cooper Kupp. I mean, this guy's getting 300 targets a week. Somebody cover him, please.
Do you know what? Yeah, it's crazy. I went back and I looked at a lot of what the Rams have done this season. I did this yesterday. And go and watch all of Cooper Kupp's 9 touchdowns on the year. Right, he walks in almost all of them. Like, it's ridiculous that they cannot come up with a defense that can just go, oh, we're going to stop the guy that's out wide in the flat. Okay. Like, it's crazy. And someone has to just watch some game film and go, oh, right, that's what we do. Because that's why he's so good. Not just Cooper Kupp, but Stafford, is because when you've got targets like Cooper Kupp just wide open who can walk in, and you've got great yak. I mean, Cooper Kupp's yak's great. Robert Woods' yak is good. Even Van Jefferson's yak is great. Like, they're all just putting the yards after the cat. I mean, Stafford doesn't even have to be Stafford of old. He's just got to find the open guys, and they're going to do all the work. So that's why I was a little shocked when I saw this, and then I thought, well, actually, it does make sense. But it shows you the thing that I took away from this data. We all knew Hurts was Hurts, and I don't think he shocked me. The only thing that ever concerned me about Hurts, and it still does, is do they trade for Watson, and does that mean the end of Hurts? But we knew that he was going to be this sort of QB, safe rushing floor, was going to be relatively consistent. He's not going to pull you the 40-point game out of the bag that you might need in a desperation. But he'll put your points up every week.
Well, just like Michael Vick was.
Yeah.
At some point, the NFL team that he's on, the Philadelphia Eagles, has to, it's great for us fantasy players who have Jalen Hurts. But for the NFL team, the Philadelphia Eagles, throwing less than 50% completions, just because you run for 100 yards, if you're still losing and you're throwing interceptions, you're not going to last long in the NFL. And this is why there's this panic of, is Deshaun Watson coming to Philadelphia? Because, he's proven that, okay, he's a great fantasy quarterback, and that's great as long as he's on the field. But the Philadelphia Eagles can't win football games with this guy at quarterback because, he's running the ball all the time, and this is what Vic did. It's great for your fantasy teams. It's terrible for the NFL team, and that doesn't last you long in the NFL. Look at Robert Griffin, RG3, Randall Cunningham way back in the day. But Michael Vick is the perfect example of, hey, he was a human highlight film. I get it, but if you're not winning football games, the NFL, you're not going to last long as the starting quarterback. So we'll see.
No, and with Jalen Hurts, as I've already alluded to, he turns up in the fourth quarter when the game's almost over. I admire his tenacity and this never say die, don't quit personality he has. Like, that's admirable in a lot of ways. But put that in the first quarter. Like, start the game like that. And then see where your team goes. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got Philadelphia. I've got a rankings of Deshaun Watson. I've got Carolina first, then Philadelphia, then Miami. That's how I think it shakes down, but you never know what happens in the NFL. But yeah, we'll see what happens. That's the only concern. I think why another reason I love this model is it justifies now this pivot that we've had in the last year, 2 years, to why you have to draft a quarterback early, because that tier underneath is Brady. All right, you would have got him in the 9th round, fair enough. But Murray, Mahomes, Jackson, Rodgers, Josh Allen, and Dak Prescott. Mm-hmm. So they're all players that have all clutch games with the exception of one game. Now, the different percentages due to those who have had bye, those who haven't had bye. So there's a slight sort of variation there. But
they're all over 80%.
Exactly. And that's why you drafted those guys, because they're going to win you more games than not. Brady might be the one that you wouldn't have put in there at the start of the season. But, yeah, I mean, it's everything that we are starting to pivot to as an ethos, that tight end quarterback in the middle rounds is kind of important. It's a linchpin to your team. Because you can't get away with these late end guys. All right, Stafford, if you drafted Stafford, you're happy. But, there's two guys in particular that if you drafted, you're pretty unhappy right now. You mentioned Justin Herbert, and the other is Ryan Tannehill, who was everybody's favorite late round QB. I mean, what was Tannehill's clutch game status right now? It's low, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like 1 for 7, something like that. Hold on.
29%.
29%, 2 for 7. Yeah. 2 for 7. Yeah, and he had been fairly consistent, but You don't need to throw the ball when your running back's getting the ball 40 times a game and rushing for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's even throwing touchdown passes they don't need to.
Exactly that. So I found it interesting. There's what I like about this, and you can find all of this work over at Dr. Roto that's mentioned that, and you can subscribe to Dr. Roto. It's a great site, lots of great contributors. We talked about it already before when you were on a few weeks ago. But you can definitely subscribe to all this. But based on what people need to know now, because they don't need us to say that good quarterbacks are good, right? But who would you say right now, looking at this field of data that you have, some quarterbacks who potentially are ones that maybe more in a super flex, so I don't think you trade from in a 1 QB league, but maybe a super flex buy low and maybe even a super flex sort of sell high based on perception, but actually the consistency says you need to probably get rid.
Well, it's probably a week too late, but he was in my last. So I do an article every week for kind of who's hot, who's not on Dr. Roto. Last week article, my who's hot and you should grab before it's too late, it was Joe Burrow. And I said, you got to get him. If you're going to trade for him, do it now, because this Baltimore game is going to be a shootout. Now, I expected it to be a shootout both directions. They decided that the Bengals were just going to be the only team scoring points. But, this guy, with everybody there, with Mixon and all 3 receivers, even with his tight end now, I mean, they're taking advantage of the poor tight end defenses. Baltimore going into last week was dead last against and giving up fantasy points to tight ends. They took advantage of it, and Uzomah had another great game. Burrow is definitely one of the hot ones. But if you're looking for that, maybe waiver wire, if you're like 10-team or a shallow 12-team league, Matt Ryan's pulled off 3 straight clutch games in a row. This week there's only the Ravens and the Raiders are off. But hey, if you're a Lamar Jackson owner, it may not be a bad idea if you're not one of those who stash quarterbacks, you just go get one. Matt Ryan's there. He's got another good game again this week against the Panthers, who all of a sudden have fallen apart. Playing against an average defense at home. He's averaged 24.94 fantasy points, 83% consistency over his last 3 years. Ryan can put up some numbers. Ridley and him are finally clicking. Gage is back. That certainly helped. He scored a touchdown, and then that left Pitts wide open. So all of a sudden, I think they're starting to realize, oh, yeah, that's right. We're a passing team. Let's do that. That seems to work well. The first few weeks was like, we're going to be run. And Arthur Smith's like, I've got Derrick Henry in the backfield. No, you don't. You have Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, and Kyle Pitts. Throw the damn ball, Arthur. And they finally figured that out. And guess what? They're winning football games. And Matt Ryan's been 3 for 3. So definitely grab him, trade for him for somebody who's got maybe sitting on a bench, especially, again, if you have Lamar or somebody like that and you need to fill in. Or you're looking, look a couple weeks out. Maybe you've got a quarterback coming up on a bye. Not a bad idea to grab somebody like that who definitely is flying under the radar at this point.
Yeah, I completely agree, because you've got Brady on bye week 9. Mahomes is bye, I think, is week 13, so it's a bit ahead. But there's a couple that have got these immediate buys. So Arizona will have one coming up soon. I
thought Mahomes' bye was last week.
Well, it felt like it, didn't it? I don't think it felt like it for him, the way he walked off the field. But yeah, I completely agree. Like, Matt Ryan is someone who's been my sort of waiver stream in the last couple of weeks, and saying that's the guy you got to pick up, because the schedule's quite nice. It opens up quite nicely for them. And as you say, they just started to click, and they've realized that Mike Davis isn't a good running back. I mean, who knew?
Well, I still don't think he's a bad running back, but good God, 1.7 fantasy points last week? That was rough.
I mean, he did it off 4 carries, so
yeah. Yeah, they didn't know much either.
I think that covers sort of quarterback. Again, it kind of proves our theory and our thinking at the start of the season. Yes, there's going to be 1, maybe 2 outliers there late, but you're going to have to really hit from a big pool for it to work, which is what the data is showing. And it'd be interesting to see at the end of the season if it holds up, because I'm pretty confident it will. Let's get into running back here, because there's a lot for me to really digest here. The first is that nobody has a 100% record here, which I don't think is a surprise given the position and its nature and volatility.
Yeah, it's tough for running backs to go 100%. It really is.
Yeah. So I'm not a big shock from that, but we do have 3 running backs sort of leading the way here. In fact, there's actually a bigger group than that. I want to throw in the ones that have had a bye or missed the game, but I think it's bye that affects it. So we've got here the 3 leading the way are Derrick Henry, which shocks absolutely no one. The other 2, which would absolutely, if you had said this at halfway, that the 3 leading backs in consistency, Derrick Henry, everyone would go, yeah, all right, fine, I'll take that. DeAndre Swift, who everyone faded because they didn't want to be part of the Lions and were scared that Todd Gurley was going to come in. And Leonard Fournette, who was an 8th round pick going after Ronald Jones in drafts because no one wanted this Tampa backfield.
Right. Yeah, and Leonard Fournette was one of those that I was definitely in on this year. Luckily, I grabbed him, as my running back 3 in a lot of leagues, and mostly because I knew he was the better talent. It was just a question of I just went brain dead on that guy's coach, Bruce Arians, making that decision that I'm going with one guy and I'm going one guy forward. And then after Jones came out, has a couple fumbles, a couple bad missed blocks on pass pro. All of a sudden, Fournette, who's always been a very good running back, just needed to have the opportunity, and he's proven it. Let's also remember this is Fournette's walk year. So he's playing for a contract too. So let's also make sure and that was another reason why I was like, what? If Fournette gets the chance, he knows he's playing for some money. It could be him staying in Tampa, but he's playing for a contract, and this is his shot. So doesn't surprise me. I wish I had him. I wish I had drafted him more. Certainly in some of the leagues, I just I did the crazy thing of drafting McCaffrey, Dobbins, and Montgomery as my first 3 picks in some of my leagues, and thought I was set. So I don't need Leonard Fournette as my 4th running back. I'm loaded. Yeah, that's working out well. So anyway, those are the leagues I have JD McKissick and Myles Gaskin starting. So, but yeah, Fournette, Fournette always had the talent. Playing on that team, certainly gives him the ability to run wild when you got to worry about Brady and Evans and Godwin and AB and the whole gang. So,
well, I think, if you watch the America's Game with Leonard Fournette, I think it really sums up him very well. That it was never talent; it's up here. It's belief and confidence, and someone believing in him. And I think it came across quite well. And my only concern with him, I always believed he'd get more work. I just never believed he'd get enough. I never believed Gio Bernard was a thing. I knew he was just the Shady McCoy.
I knew that wasn't.
No, he was the Shady McCoy replacement. If one of these guys goes down, we've got a guy. He was never going to be the new James White that everyone was touting him to be. That was. I can't remember how many shows I went on and said fade. Even if he's there in the last round, just fade. It's just a waste of a pick. Take your start on someone who's actually going to produce. But yeah, I think it shocks me that he's been this good. But long may it continue. Then we got that next tier, and then these are where all your big hitters are. These are ones that are 5 from 6, which is Eckler, Harris, Kamara, Elliott, Hunt, Henderson, which I don't think is going to surprise anyone, but also in there is the one that will shock absolutely everyone, which is Cordell Patterson. Cordell Patterson is the guy that makes us stupid.
Right? Every year there's one of these guys, isn't there? Remember Philip Lindsay and who was it last year? Somebody last year did that. James Robinson, thank you. I knew there was one. It's every year there's one of these guys, and you literally could throw darts, and maybe that would be your best shot at it or something. I don't know. But and you're just sitting there going, and Patterson been in the league for what, 8 years, 7 years?
Yeah, a long time.
He's in his upper 20s, I know for sure. And the amazing thing is that did every coach not? I get it. Didn't he play for the Bears for a while? I can get that they didn't know how to play.
He played for everyone. I think he played for the Pats.
He played for
the Bears.
Bears, Vikings. Yeah, so you're okay. Here here we go. So, yeah, and somebody said, do you think it'll continue? I go, why wouldn't it? They're not going to give Mike Davis the ball now that, and as long as Patterson stays healthy, that's their quarterback or that's their running back, and he's catching the ball. He's got a good speed, good size. If he can stay healthy, I don't see why he doesn't.
It just means that if you've got another one of these players, they need to go to Arthur Smith. So if Bruce Arians is the quarterback whisperer, Arthur Smith is very quietly becoming the gadget player, don't really have a home whisperer. And maybe he can turn like some of these great other kick returners who haven't managed to put it together into good players. But yeah, he's been terrific. And then under that, this group didn't surprise me so much, but these are 4 from 5. So Nick Chubb didn't surprise me. Only the fact that he's played 5 games is the only part that's really shocking. Josh Jacobs, because we were a bit concerned about what Kenyon Drake was going to do. And this name really blew me when I saw this because I like him. I think he's a great talent, but don't forget he was a healthy scratch week 1 with Zach Moss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Zach Moss has put together quite a sneakily good, quiet season under the radar, which shocks me because I wouldn't have put him as 4 from 5.
And the amazing thing is, I was talking about this, I think, on one of my shows last week. We were talking about the Zach Moss and Dawson Knox. Now, both of these guys have been on the Bills team for the last 3 years and have done nothing. 0. Like, I've had Dawson Knox on my bench as a tight end in one of my dynasty leagues. I don't think I played him for like the last 2.5 years. And then I'm like, then after his first clutch game, I'm like, all right, it was a fluke, maybe he just was open. And the next thing you know, he's like 3 out of 4. And I'm like, God. So then I get him in. And of course, now he broke his freaking hand. But yeah, in both cases, you're just sitting there going, oh, okay. And it's the same coach. It's the same offense. It's the same players. Why all of a sudden is Zach Moss and Dawson Knox viable fantasy players? I mean, they're not great, but they're viable and they've been fairly consistent, which is, what we're looking for. Great flex players, or at this point, he's a very good tight end, or he was a good tight end until he got hurt. I don't have an answer. I mean, maybe somebody that's smarter than me from a football standpoint can go, oh, well, Zach Moss did this or Dawson Knox did that, or they changed their offense, or I don't know.
But
it's weird because he doesn't mask up. I don't know.
But it's weird because it coincides, and I started to look at this conundrum, trying to work this one out. It coincides with him being the 26th ranked red zone offense. Like, they've been bad in the red zone. You're sitting there, it's like you've got these guys putting up points, putting up fantasy points, but they're somehow not getting it done in the red zone. And it's like, I'm trying to sit here and wrap my brains about why is it Dawson Knox? Why is it Zach Moss? Why is it not Cole Beasley? And the only thing I can point back to is the ability to get open and explosive plays, which is where all of it went to Stephon Diggs last year. And I think teams have gone, we'll double cover Diggs, we'll make it more difficult.
And that leaves one of these guys open, right?
Yeah, and it leaves. Yeah, it leaves. Is it going to be Beasley? Is it going to be Davis? Well, Davis has done nothing this year.
No.
So they're relying on.
Sanders has been very consistent.
He has, yeah. So it's an interesting. They're a loaded offense, and it just was surprising that he's come through with that consistency because I really like Zach Moss as a player. I hate the situation because Josh Allen just touchdown vultures all the work from him, but it seems to be that this year a bit more has come out, which is great.
Well, I feel like Josh Allen's probably gotten smarter as a quarterback too. Let's be honest. This year he is not forcing the ball to Stephon Diggs 14 times a game. So because of that, they're scoring more touchdowns, they're winning more football games, and again, the quarterbacks get smarter and they understand it's about winning, not about fantasy points, even though we hate it. And all of a sudden now they're spreading the ball around. I said one of Matt Ryan's best, most consistent season was the year that Julio Jones didn't get 150 targets. They spread the ball around. That was the year they made it to the Super Bowl. Ryan was one of the more consistent quarterbacks for the year, but that was the worst year from a consistency standpoint for Julio Jones. But they won. They made it to the Super Bowl. They should have won the Super Bowl. But so again, you just it's just interesting how some of that stuff kind of plays out for the numbers.
No, it does. I want to go into this next group of running backs because this is what I find interesting because there's some key trends in here because we've not mentioned some big names here in scoring. Jonathan Taylor, James Robinson, Aaron Jones, and Damian Harris. Because these are 4 running backs who would, I mean, maybe not Harris and Robinson earlier on before Etienne's injury probably wasn't taking as high, but the others were big investments in teams. They were first-round picks.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing some trends now that actually they're putting together a very good season. It just was a bit of a sluggish start.
Right. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor was my last week guy that, I mean, we know he was on everybody's team. It wasn't like he was being picked up. I was just saying that it was starting to kind of come together for Jonathan Taylor. A lot of it was he played some very good defenses in the first few weeks, and then the run defenses were a little bit weaker. But they also, just started to gel a little bit better. Wentz got a little bit better. The whole team just kind of was sinking in the right direction, helped to play some bad teams. But so, I mean, Jonathan Taylor was the guy last week. My guy this week on my article is Damian Harris. I was saying it takes a while for Belichick to be in that circle of trust for Belichick as a running back. And sometimes it can go away instantly too. I mean, that's what we have to worry about with Damian Harris. But, through the first 4 weeks, Harris was ranked 37th in total points, only 50% consistent. Ever since he's taken over and been the man, now he's over these last 3 weeks, 6th in total points, 100% consistent. This week they get the Chargers to rank 29th against fantasy running backs. So definitely we'll see that. But as I said, the problem is that you hope and pray that Damian Harris doesn't have like a 2 fumble game, because all of a sudden it'll be Ramondre Stevenson's time. And that's the risk you take. But it's a good risk to have because he's going to get fed the ball, and he certainly has been fed the ball over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really have high hopes for Damian Harris, but again, it's just whether that transpires to him, getting the ball moving forward, and long may it continue. Long may it continue that he is blossoming. He's not a guy I have a lot of exposure to, but as a player I've always liked. It was just more I wanted to fade as much of that offense as possible. But I think it's more encouraging for next year. I want to skip the next couple of guys on the list because they're out for the season. McCaffrey's back at some point. Right. We know what McCaffrey is right now. James White's out for the season. I want to focus on the guys, who are around that sort of 57%, 50% mark, and maybe a nudge under that, because there's some big names in here. Joe Mixon, Antonio Gibson, 2 that stand out. We've got Elijah Mitchell, who's now vaulted as number 1 in San Fran. You've got Michael Carter, Mike Davis, who we've kind of touched upon, so maybe we don't touch him anymore. What's going on in Denver? What's going on in Arizona? Both Arizona backs are in this window. McKissick, you've mentioned. What are some of the takeaways from this tier in terms of players who might be worth trading for, if possible, although it's going to be hard to get a running back given there's so few out there?
Yeah.
Or maybe just thinking about who should we keep faith in for the rest of the season or try and buy, and who are players who we should try and get rid of or perhaps fade and look for alternatives for the rest of the season in this group?
Well, I definitely think Chase Edmonds, he's in my who's not hot. He started off first through 4 weeks, 13th in total points, 100% consistent. Last 3 weeks, 38th in total points, 0% consistency. He's still ranked 19th overall. If you can somehow swindle somebody out of maybe trading him, for somebody maybe on the upswing, like an Elijah Mitchell or a Myles Gaskin, somebody like that, I got to believe maybe even a J.D. McKissick, because, again, we don't know if Gibson can stay healthy. He's already struggling. That's why he's down at the 57%, because here we go. Starts off like wildfire, and then the lingering injuries come in is what has been his issue in the past. And, if you can maybe, again, get rid of, trade off Gibson for somebody like a Joe Mixon or somebody that's heading in the right direction, that may not be a bad idea. But, yeah, it's those guys, I think, Mixon's never been consistent. He's never on any of my teams because he always seems to kind of just stutter, kind of stall out at that 65-ish%, maybe 70%. He's a good RB2, but the problem is you always have to draft him as an RB1, and that's what sucks. Because again, he has his injury issues as well. I mean, we've already seen that already this year. So those guys, I think when you always see them in the middle, more often than not, it's the injuries, the lingering injuries, not a major injury that puts you out for a year, but the 1 or 2 weeks. Am I coming back? Am I not coming back? Am I 100% healthy? Am I not? Those are the ones that drive us crazy. If you're gonna get hurt, break a leg and get out for the year, so I can just move on. Don't make me think every week that you're coming back, and maybe it's this week, maybe it's not. Do I need to make a trade? Do I need to pick up somebody on waiver wire? I mean, that's the more frustrating thing, I think, for fantasy owners are those kind of guys than okay, I'm hurt, I'm out for the year, and we move on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I look at this sort of group in the middle and think about you're looking at opportunity, right? So I look at these and think McKissick's got opportunity. I look at Gainwell and think, well, he's now got opportunity. Miles Sanders isn't getting it done. I do think there's some big red herrings in here. I think Kenyon Drake is a massive red herring. He's got 2 clutch games in a row. I would say they're fluky because of touchdowns. I don't necessarily think that he's a guy going forward I feel confident in. I like James Conner and his usage. I think he's got opportunity going forward. And again, Chase Edmonds is another guy who just doesn't stay healthy. I think it's interesting. There's some red flags in here. I mean, Gaskin is a red flag because of that offense. We'll see what happens, but he's almost touchdown dependent, but he's not. He's in a 3-way backfield. That's tough. Booker is going to be relevant for a week, maybe 2. We'll see what happens.
8. Depends on.
Yeah, with Barkley, you never know.
He's another one that I'm just about done with. This may be the last year I ever have him.
I mean, there was a reason why people were fading into the second round.
I drafted him in the second round in a couple of leagues thinking, okay, well, how can this go bad? Well, here we are.
Yeah, and he's, it's a difficult situation monitoring that injury, and hopefully he does come back. But yeah, I look at this and think this is exactly why you have to draft running backs early, because you look at these, you have to invest. I mean, okay, Cordarrelle Patterson aside, everyone that you drafted early, you might have missed on the first one, but if you went running back, likelihood is that you've got one of those guys who's performing at a top level, unless you pick guys who've just got injured, which that's just unfortunately the luck. But again, this is I keep stressing this. Why I love this method is it's why you solidify a draft strategy, because you're having to invest in the places which are thin, and you need to get those consistent guys on your team. Otherwise, you're struggling. All right, no one would have predicted CPAT, but everyone was convinced Najee Harris was going to do well. And it's just solidifying why people went in on these players as high as they have. There's a couple of outliers. There's always going to be with injuries and opportunity, but if you look at these numbers, you're not really shocked by the guys at the top here for the most part, with the exception of those outliers. And then the same can be said now for wide receivers, because this is the group. And the thing that shocked me here with wide receivers was the amount of people that are in the 100% club, because you've got 7. All right, 2 of them are here on a technicality that they've only played one game.
1 for 1, yeah, right.
But the other 5 have been ever present. Actually, I think 1 missed a game. But you've got Cooper Kupp, which shocks no one. Jamar Chase, which probably shocks no one. Probably shock you at the start of the season, but if you've watched him this season, wouldn't shock you. And then you've got DK Metcalf and Justin Jefferson. Now, these guys were top 5, top 7 wide receiver picks. So again, I don't think anyone is shocked to see them up here. And then Deontay Johnson, which for me is absolutely no shock that he's here. I grabbed him in every draft I could in the 5th or 6th round, because I always believed that he was the guy who was going to get the ball. He might not get the explosive plays. He might not get all the red zone work, but he was always going to be consistent. I always believed that if I looked at those three wide receivers at the start, he was the one who was going to be the most consistent. And that's why I went in. And it goes back to last season, because last season he was the most consistent.
Right.
Like, if nothing has changed, why would you expect anything different? If the same players have come back, with the exception of they've added Najee Harris, why would you expect anything different? It's the same.
I agree. I wish I would have drafted more of him. I guess I just was probably there was somebody close to him most of the time, and I went, "Oh, I'm going to go that direction." Probably Robert Woods, because I have a lot of Robert Woods, and he was probably drafted around the same time, and obviously that was a bad idea. Now, Robert Woods is, this is the funny thing is everybody's so down on Robert Woods. Okay, I get it. He's 21st in total points, 86% consistent. He's only missed one game. Granted, he's not getting Cooper Kupp numbers, but there's a guy. When you talk about like trading for somebody because somebody's probably down on him, find the guy who has Robert Woods. Honestly, he's probably putting him in his flex, but he probably doesn't realize his consistency because he's like, he's 21st. Nah.
Yeah.
So if you give up and say, hey, I'll trade you, a Mike Williams or somebody that's been hot early in the year that's starting to cool off, or a T. Higgins or Brandon Cooks, say, hey, look, Brandon Cooks is, 18th in total points, and hey, I'll trade you for him, Yeah, they shouldn't be that dumb, but you never know.
No, you don't. But you got to give it a go, I think. And like you say, I think Robert Woods. I look at this and go, he is the one buy low, because everyone's going, oh, it's Cooper Kupp's show. Like, he's not going to get this one. He's doing just fine. Like, he's not gonna. He's gonna return. He's gonna return as a wide receiver too. That's gonna happen. Like, he might even go up. He's got no, like, this is his floor. Where he's at now is his floor. He's got no other competition for targets. It's going to boom.
At some point, teams are going to double cover Cooper Kupp and say, okay, we're not going to get beat by Cooper Kupp. Then they'll just like it happened in, 2 or 3 weeks ago when Robert Woods had 12 catches for like 100-some yards. That's what's going to happen, and so, yeah, definitely he's one of those. But no, I mean, the consistency information, especially this week by week stuff, really shows you those trends and, really highlights the guys that are moving in that direction up or down. Because, again, if they're not scoring the big points, like if they're not getting 30 or 25 points, they don't show up on people's radars. And that's always a problem with people, is that they're looking for that top 12 wide receivers instead of the top 36, and looking for those guys that, hey, this guy's, popped off 3 straight games of 15 points. But that doesn't show up on most people's radars because it's boring. I wanted the guy that scored 45 last week. Well, no, you don't, because in this week he'll score 3. That's what this whole consistency concept's about, is, finding those guys. I mean, like Emmanuel Sanders, he's 67%. He started off slow, but he's 4 out of his last, actually 4 straight, because they had a bye week this past week. So he went 4 straight because, again, teams are focusing on stopping Stephon Diggs. Sanders is a good wide receiver, knows how to, Josh Allen likes to extend plays. Emmanuel Sanders is very good of helping the quarterback getting open for those play extensions. And you'll see that a lot of the Sanders catches are those extension plays where Allen's running around, Sanders gets to the open spot, boom, 10-yard first down. That's what he wants. Let Stephon Diggs do the deep stuff and do everything else. But he's certainly been, very good at keeping Josh Allen out of trouble. But yeah, so I mean, that's definitely what we're here for. And again, as you mentioned, Dr. Roto, you can go there. There's a consistency report there. You can put in your own scoring method, and you can get the same exact data that I have and we have right out of there. You can download the Excel, and you can see the information and know who's hot, who's not. So.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a valuable guide. It's a valuable tool, because it's, as you're saying, boom and busts are great to a degree, but consistency is what's going to get you there. There is a theory that arguably you want the most total points, but if all your points come in one week, you're not going to consistently make the playoffs. You might end up winning a week, or do you know what? You might win a week and then you might make the playoffs, but then you'll bust and you'll wonder why didn't I win my league? It's because you didn't have
Right.
Everyone has a wide receiver one on in the playoffs. Everyone has a running back one on their team. Everyone has a quarterback one on their team. Everyone has a wide receiver one on their team, right? Regardless of whether one is slightly better than the other, they're all going to kind of average out to be close.
Right.
It's actually the depth and quality you have of your team, and having a consistent flex guy is always going to supersede a boom or bust flex guy. And there's some names in this group of wide receivers here that really stand out to me. One, Michael Pittman. I mean, he's probably a bit late to be a under the radar guy, but he's put together, I think it's 5 of his last 6 weeks. He's had clutch games according to your
4
data.
Which 5,
yeah. So he's had a phenomenal run that he's put together, and then also 4 in his last 5 is Hunter Renfro. Now, Hunter Renfro is an under the radar guy. No one really wants. Everyone looks at that offense and wants Ruggs because he's got the big play threat. But Hunter Renfro is very, very under the radar, getting stuff done. What are your initial sort of takeaways from those two guys?
I mean, like you said, the interesting thing was everybody was kind of high on Pittman in preseason, so his ADP was certainly much, much higher. But yeah, Hunter Renfro is that guy. Hunter Renfro is the Julian Edelman for Derek Carr. Hunter Renfro is not going to get 6 catches for 150 yards. He's going to get 6 catches for about 70 yards. But that's 13 fantasy points. If he scores a touchdown, that's gravy. But that is those kind of players, especially if you have a deep league like our Kings Classic. We have 3 flex players in addition to 3 receivers. So, Hunter Renfro is one of my flexes every week in my Kings Classic teams. Those are the kind of guys, again, if you're, I always tell people, look at your record, but also look at your total points, because you could be 2-5 and be top 5 in scoring in your league. It's not because you're inconsistent. It's just because you're having some bad luck. You might be inconsistent, maybe, but more often than not, you just got some bad luck. Like, I definitely have leagues where I'm 2-5, I'm top 5 in scoring, but I'm top 3 in points against. Okay, you're going to get some bad runs, but if you're scoring the points and you're not winning, you're going to win. It's going to come, especially if your team is up there in that top 5 every week. You're going to have those weeks where it all should plan out. So don't panic. I mean, if you're at least 2-5, like you said, if you're 0-7 or 1-6, okay, you're probably not in the top 5 in scoring. You could be, but it'd be damn rare. It's more often than not, you're 2-5, 3-4, but you're up there. That's where the consistency. If you're scoring the points, it'll come. If you're not in the top 5 in scoring, then that's part of the problem. If you're the only 2 games you won was because you beat 2 really bad teams that are below you, then that's a whole different world. But look at your whole team. Don't just necessarily go, I'm 2-5, my team sucks. It may not suck. You may just have to find some of these players like Hunter Renfro and Brandon Cooks and Emmanuel Sanders and Tim Patrick and those kind of guys who are getting that 13 to 15 points a week that you can fill in your flex spots and your wide receivers, and especially for bye weeks, and get you through to pull off some wins. I mean, you get 2 more wins, all of a sudden, boom, you're 5-4, you're in a playoff hunt. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if you turn around in a PPR league and you trade, let's say, for example, you've got an Aaron Jones on your team, right? And you traded Aaron Jones. On paper, this looks horrific, but actually would make a lot of sense. If you traded Aaron Jones right now for Cordell Patterson and Hunter Renfro, your team would be a better team.
Yeah.
It would be a better team because you're having consistent points. Those guys are putting together. In fact, you could probably get something better than Hunter Renfro. You could probably get Cordell Patterson and let's find someone in here that I think is maybe Marquise Brown or maybe Michael Pittman.
Or Robert Woods.
There you go. So Robert Woods, if you've got Robert Woods and Cordell Patterson for Aaron Jones,
right,
your team will instantly be better because you've got a consistent team, but you're going to get more net points. It's all about net points. Right. So you take your Aaron Jones points out and you take whoever you take out of your flex for whichever one of those players would go in your flex, it would probably be one of your wide receiver. But yeah, let's say you've got an inconsistent wide receiver here who's just not getting it done. Yeah, that could be Ruggs. That could be
Amari Cooper.
I mean, you probably keep him in your lineup. But if you think about who might be in your flex, you might have a Brian Edwards in your flex. You might have Quintus Cephas or an Odell Beckham Jr. in your flex who just aren't getting it done. Having a Hunter Renfro or Robert Woods in there is just consistently going to help you get more points every week, and that's the name of the game. So you might, as Bob said, you might need to make a change. But this is why we do this podcast. This is why when he offered, I was like, we're doing it because these are the players now you need to target in leagues to turn your nearly runs into playoff teams, and you'll go deep in the playoffs because these players won't let you down. There's nothing worse.
Right.
It's nothing worse than losing by 3 points, is there? And it's like, I lost by 3 points, and then you panic and you go for the high scorers when actually you just needed a consistent performance in there.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to trade off these players who are grossly underperforming because somebody will buy the name. And I'm talking about Terry McLaurin and Allen Robinson. They're not in the right offense with the right quarterbacks right now that is going to make them what they were in the past. Maybe if Fitzpatrick comes back, maybe. But, if you can go out and say, hey, I'll give you Aaron Jones and Terry McLaurin and, give me three guys. Give me, like you said, maybe a Patterson, Robert Woods, and, Antonio Brown.
Yeah.
All of those guys are going to help your team. If you can improve that depth, that's something I always like to trade for. Like today I traded in a dynasty league. And they wanted to give me like a first, second, and third. And I said, I tell you what, throw out the third or throw out the second and give me Alan Lazard and Tyler Boyd. I need some depth at wide receiver. They didn't even argue. Now, I just, Lazard is young, Boyd is young. They're both in good offenses. I mean, yeah, Devontae Adams could be out, but Lazard is quietly becoming the number 2 favorite to, for Aaron Rodgers, and that's what you want. And so, get lesser players, but more consistent players and improve your depth. That will help your team overall down the road. You got buys still, lots of buys to come, whole season to go, injuries, so the more depth you can have and you're not grabbing somebody off the waiver wire every week to save your flex spot. That's going to be disheartening. You don't want that.
100%. A couple of these other under the radar guys, just to give some people some ideas. Sterling Shepard, he's 3 from 4. And he's close to return. I know he's been out, but he was really close to playing last week, and I expect him to be back. So he's another one I'd like to be trying to target. T. Higgins, although the secret might be out on him after his 15 target game. I know he's only 3 from 5, but he's another one. And Cortland Sutton's on the rise again. He might be slightly difficult because he's a name, but he's 3 clutch games in a row now. It's not the best offense, and that might get people to tempt to move away. But yeah, he's another one I'd be looking to try and get in places where people go, oh, I don't want Sutton tied to Bridgewater because he doesn't have this 30-point ceiling anymore. But he's going to be consistent because even though Judy's going to come back this week, I've just read, which just popped up on my screen in the last 10 minutes. I still think he's well worth adding based on what he's been doing. So. There's some guys definitely worth targeting. Let's move to tight ends. We only have one tight end with 100% consistency, who's not playing right now, and that's Robert Gronkowski. But he is the only one. He played 3 in a row and 3 consistent clutch games, but he should be back this week, I would expect. Or if he's not, then he'll be out to week 10 because there's a bye in week 9. But I think he'll probably see the field. I don't know if he'll start this week. Underneath the top 2 guys, Kelsey and Waller, in terms of where you would have drafted them at the start of the season, and then a guy who absolutely no one drafted in Dalton Schultz, which is which is why I can't. There's always a Dalton Schultz every year. There is always a Dalton Schultz. There's always someone. In fact, there's always more than one. There's always someone like that. Which is why you don't need to draft tight end.
Yeah. Just like running backs, there's always that one guy. And like you said, Dawson Knox is right there below Mark Andrews at 67%. And that's only because he got hurt in week 6 and then, didn't earn a clutch game. But he had 4 straight after starting the year. So, yeah, there's always somebody. The hottest guy right now, and again, I don't even know if anybody's really noticed, is Mike Gesicki.
Yeah.
Since week 3, so the first 2 weeks combined, Mike Gesicki had 7.1 fantasy points combined. Since then, he has second in total fantasy points, 80% consistency, and he has earned 12 more fantasy points since week 3 than Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize how hot he's been. And Tua came back, and it didn't seem to matter. I was kind of worried because I thought maybe Tua didn't like him because he didn't throw to him the first 2 weeks. Now, granted, their wide receivers are all hurt. That's a problem. Certainly, when they come back, he may see a few less targets, but I think he's proven that he's a good safety blanket, and Tua needs him, and I think he continues that success. But again, if you've got a TJ Hawkinson or Dallas Goedert or somebody like that, George Kittle, trade him off for Gesicki. Throw in Kittle's going to be back. He's healthy. He's a stud. Hey, I'll take Gesicki off your hands. Maybe they haven't noticed. Maybe they have Kelce and they have Gesicki on the bench. Who knows? But he's been amazing.
My guy in this list, and one I picked up in quite a lot of drafts, was Hunter Henry, and he's coming off 4 consecutive clutch games. I know it was a ropey start, trying to get that offense going. They're starting to roll. He's got touchdowns in most of those games. So
he was who's hot last week, right?
Yeah, and he's continuing it on. And again, I don't like taking victory laps, but I kept telling people Johnny Smith is not a thing. He's not a thing, until the guy puts up 1,000 yards in the season or even 900. Do you know what? Even put up 800 yards in the season, then I'll take Johnny Smith seriously. The guy's best season is 400 odd yards. Like, he's not a thing. Like, but look at the tape. Don't worry about the tape. It's production. But what does he put on the field? What he puts on tape is great, but means nothing if he doesn't put it on the field. So, but there are 2 guys here that I want to highlight because they're on my waiver wire list this week. And again, it's for good reason because of actually this data shows it. It's Mo Alley Cox and CJ Uzuma. So thoughts on both of those?
Yeah, like you said, Uzuma is one of those that, it's 3 out of his last 4 weeks. They seem to be using him when they're playing against bad defenses, against the tight end. With those 3 receivers running around out there, how is he not open? So I think he's definitely been a red zone target favorite, just because the teams are so focused on trying to stop. If you put those 3 receivers spread out and then Uzuma's in there blocking, it just kind of, chips somebody and then just kind of slides out. Nobody's watching. He's wide open most of the time in the end zone. So, I think he's a great pickup. And Mo Alley Cox is finally starting to earn some good rapport with Carson Wentz. I've always thought he was a good tight end. They just weren't throwing the ball to the tight ends much. But again, just like kind of in Miami with all the injuries to Hilton and Pittman and Pascal and can't remember the other guy, Paris Campbell. They can't keep their wide receiver core healthy. And so it appears that Mo Alley Cox is definitely the beneficiary of that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, this is, again, why tight end is just not a position to heavily draft. Yes, tight end. Travis Kelce is the tight end 1, but he's returned 122 fantasy points through this point of the season. He's not had a bye yet. That's good enough for, I think it's maybe top 10 wide receiver. I think he slots in at 10.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think he's wide receiver 10 on the season. So, fine, but but you were taking him in the first round for positional advantage when actually he's got a 16-point advantage over Mark Andrews, but he's only got a 30-point advantage over. 38-point advantage over Dalton Schultz, who you either got for free or a little bit more over Dawson Knox. Like, it's just, and maybe you double that through the season. Maybe it's a little bit more than double. It's still not enough for the value of position, and that's why Waller, you're kicking yourself if you took him in the second round. TJ Hawkinson in the 4th round, you're kicking yourself. Kyle Pitts, and listen, I think Kyle Pitts will kick on and he'll be the tight end 4 in the year. you're kicking yourself if you took him in the 4th round. They're not going to return their ADP based on what you could have got around those areas. But they are what they are. They might be consistent, but you could have think of the players. Think what you could have won. You could have got Robert Woods over TJ Hawkinson. I'm just saying. Your team would be a lot better now if you have Robert Woods than TJ Hawkinson. But this has been amazing. Are there any other sort of insights that you would say from the data that we've missed, or any other names you want to shout out, people that should buy or sell?
Again, I think the key is I think in what we're here preaching is, don't ignore the importance of consistency. And if you have questions, hit me up. Anybody who knows me out there, if you hit me up on Twitter and say, hey, Bob, I'm looking at these 3 players, or I'm thinking about doing this trade, I'll share that consistency information with you. I want you to go subscribe, and I want you to go to Dr. Roto, and I want you to do all that. And certainly that's, get you the information. But, as long as you're not abusive, which most people are, hit me up. That's what we're here. The whole idea of this is to make you a better fantasy player, get you a few more wins so you make the playoffs. Once you make the playoffs, anything can go. But, I always tell people, they're always like, well, I was looking at weeks 15, 16, 17, or 14, 15, 16. And I'm thinking this and that. I'm like, that doesn't do you anything if you don't make the playoffs. So don't look at the playoff schedule until you make the playoffs. Should I trade because this guy's got this great lineup in the playoffs? Well, get there. If you're going to get, if you're 6-0, all right, I get it. You probably have a good shot. Then you can talk about that, or 7-0. But certainly, that's certainly a good chance. But people worry too much about the future, worry too much about the now. They look at the one. I call them the 1 week wonders. Hey, look, I just saw that this guy went off last week, and should I pick him up? Yes, for every Cordell Patterson that you may pick up in a waiver wire, or, you're going to have 20 others. I think one year I actually tracked this, and I think the percentage of players who finished the year from that point after their first big 1 week that went over 60% consistency over the rest of the season was like less than 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
Maybe even less, maybe 1 out of 20. Every once in a while you get a Cordell Patterson, or you get a, the James Robinsons, or the, those kind of things. But more often than not, you're just going to get a lot of disappointment, folks. I'm going to tell you right now. People always kind of give me grief, like, you don't spend a lot of money on fab. Only if I need it. And then usually I'm just like, I don't want to spend 80% of my fab on a player that maybe makes it for me for 3 or 4 weeks. Like I said, maybe you get lucky, you get a Cordell Patterson, maybe. But more often than not, you're really just you're buying a lot of disappointment, in my opinion.
It is tricky. I sit here and advise people on waiver wires who to pick up, what to spend. Mm-hmm. And I am one of those that I never say to anyone spend 100% of your fab on a player, because it's very rarely worth it. But I did this year. Pardon?
I did. I forget what week it was. Who was the big running back in about week 3?
Chuba Hubbard.
No,
Damian Williams.
It was Trey Sermon. When Trey Sermon came out, when Elijah Mitchell got hurt and Sermon came in, I saw somebody spend 100% of their fab on Trey Sermon.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm just like, okay.
Yeah. I was one of those last year that went big on James Robinson and Mike Davis in teams, and it turned 4 teams around.
James Robinson worked out.
Yeah, you will hit on them, but to make that play, you've got to be in a position where your team's not great. And I think, fine, if your team's not great and you're going to gamble it, why not? Because you might as well go down swinging. I always try and tell people that 25-30% on a player like that is fine, because even if you whiff, you've still got the rest of your fab to take another shot. Because I think you've got to take the shots on players, especially if your team's bad. If your team's good, you don't have to. You can sit there and let other people waste the fab. But if your team's bad, you've got to get it. You've got to buy a ticket. It is a lottery at that point. Mm-hmm. And you might land the Cordell Patterson or James Robinson, or you might land you might land Damian Williams. If you spend 60% of your fab on Damian Williams right now, he's just lost his job to Khalil Herbert.
Right.
So but then if you bought Khalil Herbert, you're laughing, because you probably would have got him at a tenth of the price. because no one expected him to be a thing. I think it's an interesting. We could do a whole different thing on Fab and how it ties in with consistency, and I think maybe we should do that one day because I think people will learn a lot. But I think, yeah, as you said, you've always been really kind on Twitter, and you've always interact with everybody who asks. So I encourage people to ask Bob questions on consistency guide, because if you can get your head around this, it's not a difficult concept, but if you get your head around it and you have this data, you'll be a better fantasy player because you'll understand values in drafts. It's why I always advocate for people go draft Robert Woods. You'll never go wrong. He'll never ever that guy will never underperform his ADP because no one rates him. No one rates him.
Yeah,
I'm probably the biggest.
Like Jarvis Landry was for almost every year of the last 6 or 7.
Brandon
Cooks always went as like wide receiver 36-ish in most drafts, and every year he was consistency wise top 15.
Yeah.
Now granted, since Browns died off a little bit and he's getting a little older and getting injuries are starting to catch up to him. But yeah, Robert Woods is really now the new Jarvis Landry. I mean, you just know you're getting 75% consistency every year out of him, and you can draft him as your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, 100%. So there's lots on there, and this then leads to the consistency guide, which you publish every year, which I encourage all of our readers to get, and we'll give away some copies in the off season because it's such a valuable toolkit. For me, there's several guides that I have packaged together. If there was a way that Amazon would let us do it, we'd be better off because I think you get strategy mixed with consistency, mixed in with understanding player values. If you can conquer those 3 triangles and pillars, you're going to be an unstoppable force in fantasy in most leagues. And that's where good players understand consistency, they understand the strategy, and they understand where to get player value and what players are worth. And if you can understand those 3 aspects, and we try to do a lot of teaching on this podcast, but consistency is one that we always push because you can't go wrong with a consistent team. You might not win, but you'll make the playoffs most years if you're consistent.
Right. The key is like you may have an average consistent team and you might go 8-7, but that probably will get you in the playoffs. I mean, if you had a pretty good, strong competitive league, like our Kings Classics or, good, strong local league, usually if you're above 500, 8-7, 9-6, you're probably going to squeak in the number 6 spot. At worst, you might even get higher than that, depending on how competitive. But, and you think, oh, well, geez, that should be easy. But, again, you always run into the, like if you could have ran in last week into Tua because, somebody had to start Tua because their quarterback was off. That was what happened to me in our Dr. Roto league. So I got my ass kicked. I was the 3rd highest scoring team in the league, lost by 40. So, it happens. And you can't say it's bad luck. I mean, yeah, I get it. It is. But again, if I score 130 points next week and I'm the 3rd highest scorer, I probably have a very good chance I'll win. And that's the key. It's like, don't just say, oh, yeah, I have bad luck and I'm 2-5 and I'm the 3rd highest scoring team. Doesn't necessarily mean you have bad luck. It just means that, okay, some things have happened. You've ran into a couple of weeks, but if you keep that scoring and you just keep that consistency, you might win 3 out of the next 4. And all of a sudden, boom, you're right back in the swing of things. So don't panic. Don't trade your team away because you think, oh, well, I'm done. And, if anything, look to improve your team, get some more depth, get some more consistency, find the Robert Woods, find the Michael Pittmans, find the, guys we talked about in this show, and build that team up, get that depth, because then you're prepared. Another thing to do right now, too, is look at guys on teams that their buys are done. Yeah. So especially from the 6 from last week, go trade for guys like Emmanuel Sanders because their buy's done. And trade off a guy that is kind of the same player, but has a buy coming up in 9 or 10. And hey, I'm going to be a little bit weak that week. Go trade Emmanuel Sanders for a guy that's off in week 10. You'd be surprised how that will save you too, because people don't think about that. They're like, well, I got to buy in week 10. And they're, I don't want to trade. Well, go get the players and you can fill in those spots with similar results while the other teams are panicking and struggling. You've got the solid team to keep it going. So that's another thing to look at this point too, is the trades.
Yeah, Antonio Brown would be a good one to trade right now because he might not play this week with an ankle injury. He's kind of 50-50. He might play through, and then he's on bye the following week.
Right.
So you might get Hunter, maybe not Hunter Renfro, but maybe you get Robert Woods for Antonio Brown. People might be tempted to do that. All right, you're not had to buy, but then maybe you get Emmanuel Sanders for Emmanuel Sanders and something else for Antonio Brown. Maybe you get Emmanuel Sanders and Hunter Renfro for Antonio Brown and something else. That could be an ultimate win-win. And one of those guys has had their buy, you're sorted.
Right.
Another one is another consistent player. As you say, don't be afraid to make moves.
Again, inexperienced players love names. So the Terry McLaurins, Allen Robinsons, Antonio Browns, all these guys are names. And so they look at it and go, oh, I got AB on my team. Well, that's great. But he's injured. He might not come back for 2-3 weeks. Yeah, he was very good early in the season. But they still have Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I mean, he's not going to be that consistent. Brady's going to focus on, the players, and he's going to throw to who's open too. So that's always a problem. I mean, it's a good thing for football teams. It's and so far, Godwin and Evans has stayed pretty consistent as well as AB when they've been on the field. But again, if you're 2-5, you got to make moves that get you wins. So it's not like you're giving up on the future. You're just improving the current.
And that's enough, especially if you're 4-3, 5-2, 3-4. That's what you need to do. You need to turn around now, and that's how you steal points. You're stealing points. If you trade someone who has already had the buy, you trade for them, you're getting an extra game. It's an extra game set of points. Think about who you would slot in that place. Maybe let's say Henry Ruggs, and let's say, for example, you're basically stealing an extra 7 to 10 points on your roster.
Yeah, and here's another thing too. If you're 5-2 to 7-0, this is the perfect time to start trading and start looking to the future. Then you start trading off an Aaron, like you said, the Aaron Jones for more depth, and look at your bye weeks and really start. The one thing that people make the mistake is when they're 7-0, they're like, my team is awesome, man. I'm just going to coast.
Yeah.
No, that's the worst thing you can do. That's when you end up being 7-8, and you're like, what the hell happened? Because a couple of injuries hit. Next thing you know, you're not prepared. You don't have the depth to get through the bye weeks. You don't have the depth from the injuries. Making sure you have handcuffs. If you've got a guy like an Aaron Jones, do you have an A.J. Dillon on your bench just in case? Because it can happen. And if you're riding high on some big players, and one of those or two of those go down, you'd be amazed how quickly your team goes from 7-0 to 7-5 and 7-6. So, people always used to kind of be like, why are you trading? Why are you trading away this player? Why, usually they figured I was pulling something fast one on them, but I'm like, no, look, I can need some help at wide receiver. You need to help at what you're running back. I want to improve my team. You have more depth. And they're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I get it. All right. And then they take the trade because they think it's just too obvious, but you're helping yourself. Don't, if you can add two good players for one, whether it's exceptional, at least to that point, I'm sure a lot of people, if you offered up Cordell Patterson, would be like, he's going to fail at some point.
Yeah.
Well, if that's what your league's attitude is, go the opposite way. If you don't have Patterson, go get him. Now, maybe you have to give up somebody for him, but it may not, maybe you give up a Terry McLaurin or an Allen Robinson for Patterson. It sounds like a terrible trade on paper, but right now, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good trade, especially if you don't have the depth at running back. So,
couldn't agree more. I think there's so much that you could take away from this podcast and things that you'll take away from consistency. But the bottom line is we did this to get your teams better, and we've given you a ton of names. I would suggest you pause this at the moment, write names down, and get some trades going. And if you want to get any further advice, you can reach out to Bob. You can reach out to me. You can also join our Patreon as well and join our exclusive WhatsApp group and get some additional support there from the guys in the WhatsApp group, from myself and everyone there. So there's a lot of additional resource there. But Bob, tell everyone where they can subscribe to Dr. Roto, where they can find you and interact with you and learn a lot more about consistency.
Got it. So again, you can find me on Twitter at Bob_Lung. So you see the name, just put an underscore in between them. I think you got to do all little letters though. But anyway, find me on drroto.com. It is Dr. Roto, DRROTO.com. And yeah, you'll have to subscribe to get to the consistency information, but it's worth it, guys. There's a lot. I mean, especially if you do DFS and all the other sports, man, there's some super smart people on that site. So, Dr. Roto himself is definitely one of the best out there. He's always very helpful. We have a Discord channel, so you can come in and ask all kinds of questions, and we'll answer them for you as well. So yeah, it's a it's pricey. But it's no different than any other site out there, and you get so much for the value. So definitely and you can't get the consistency anywhere else. So definitely come check it out.
Exactly that. To take advantage, it's not that pricey in comparison to what you get, and if winning is everything to you, it's money well spent. But thank you so much as always. We'll get you on again in the off season and talk about consistency and the book and everything when that's coming out. But as always, it's been a pleasure. Don't forget, Rush Nation, we've got the Dynasty guys on straight after this, so you tune into them. Don't forget to check out manscaped.com. Don't forget to check out the DFS show and everything else that we've got going on. So take advantage of all the offers and everything that we're doing. Take advantage of Dr. Roto and Bob's immaculate work around consistency. I've learned a lot from looking at the data. I know you all will benefit from listening to this and be better players as a result. But as always, for another week, don't forget, keep rushing.